Dick Van Dyke revealed the 6 most evil actors of all time. Few performers in Hollywood history are more beloved than Dick Van Dyke. For over 70 years, his infectious charm and wholesome image have made him a trusted figure in American entertainment. This makes his private assessments of Hollywood's dark side all the more shocking. Van Dyke saw these legends as they truly were, revealed a former studio assistant, not the carefully crafted public images, but the real people behind closed doors. And some of what he saw deeply disturbed him. What makes these revelations so compelling is how they expose the gap between beloved public personas and disturbing private realities. The charming leading men, beloved comedians, and father figures America invited into their homes often concealed personalities marked by violence, cruelty, and abuse of power. Hollywood excels at image management, noted a cultural historian. What's remarkable about Van Dyke's perspective is that, as someone who maintained genuine integrity throughout his career, he could recognize when the gap between image and reality wasn't just showbiz marketing but something more sinister, a cover for genuinely destructive behavior. In the following minutes, we'll examine 6 legendary actors whom Van Dyke reportedly identified as particularly troubling, not just difficult personalities or demanding artists, but men whose behavior crossed lines that shocked even their peers. These weren't simply celebrities with temper tantrums, but performers whose actions left lasting damage on those unfortunate enough to enter their orbit. But first, we need to understand how one of America's most successful comedians could make audiences worldwide laugh while creating an atmosphere of fear and humiliation for those who worked behind the scenes, and why Dick Van Dyke found this Jekyll and Hyde persona particularly disturbing.
Better, but you still have to get the Black & Decker to open you up. Oh yeah. And then
1. Jerry Lewis, the dark side of a comedy legend. When Jerry Lewis bounded across movie screens in the 1950s and 1960s, audiences witnessed a comedian of extraordinary physical gifts and childlike exuberance. His rubber-faced expressions and manic energy created a comic persona that seemed the embodiment of pure, uninhibited joy. This carefully crafted image made him a genuine cultural phenomenon whose appeal transcended national boundaries. Behind this joyful facade, however, lurked a man known for extraordinary cruelty, particularly toward those with less power than himself. Lewis created a comic character that appeared to be the opposite of calculation, explained a film historian. The reality behind the scenes couldn't have been more different. Every gesture was meticulously planned, and Lewis demanded the same obsessive precision from everyone around him. According to those who worked with him, Lewis maintained control through humiliation, verbal abuse, and explosive rage. Crew members, particularly women, often bore the brunt of his perfectionism, with Lewis berating them publicly for even minor perceived failures. Dick Van Dyke encountered Lewis several times throughout his career and was reportedly stunned by the disconnect between his public and private personas, noted an entertainment historian. Van Dyke once reportedly remarked to a colleague, "Jerry hated being questioned. That made him dangerous." It captured something essential about Lewis: his inability to tolerate any challenge to his absolute authority. This intolerance extended beyond creative decisions to his treatment of those he perceived as beneath him. Multiple accounts describe Lewis deliberately humiliating extras, technicians, and supporting performers, sometimes for actual mistakes, but often seemingly for his own amusement or to establish dominance. Lewis had a particular reputation for his treatment of women, observed a cultural analyst. Female performers described a pattern of belittling comments, unwanted advances disguised as jokes, and an atmosphere where women were either sexual objects or targets for humiliation. For someone like Van Dyke, who prided himself on treating women with respect, this aspect of Lewis's behavior would have been particularly disturbing. What makes Lewis's case especially complicated was his genuine philanthropic work with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. This duality, the cruel taskmaster behind the scenes and the tearful advocate for children on camera, created a moral complexity that Van Dyke reportedly found deeply troubling. He made the world laugh while breaking people behind the camera, concluded the historian. What separated Lewis from simply being a tough director was the seemingly gratuitous nature of his cruelty. The humiliation often seemed to be the point rather than a side effect of pursuing excellence.
Say good night. Say good night to the gentleman now.
Good night to the gentleman.
That's right, now to these gentlemen.
2. Errol Flynn, suave menace in a tuxedo. When Errol Flynn swashbuckled across theater screens in classics like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, he embodied a particular kind of dashing heroism that captivated audiences worldwide. With his athletic grace and roguish charm, Flynn became Hollywood's definitive action hero of the 1930s and early 1940s. Behind the heroic image, however, was a man whose real-life behavior was disturbing even by Hollywood's permissive standards. Flynn's screen persona was intoxicating precisely because it suggested danger contained within acceptable boundaries, explained a film historian. His characters operated outside the law, but always in service of a higher moral purpose. The horror of Flynn's real life was that it inverted this formula. Beneath the veneer of sophisticated charm lay genuine darkness unrestrained by moral boundaries. This darkness manifested most disturbingly in Flynn's treatment of women. Throughout his career, he faced multiple allegations of sexual assault, including 2 high-profile statutory rape trials in 1943. Though acquitted in both cases, leading to the infamous phrase, "in like Flynn," the pattern of predatory behavior continued, with numerous women describing encounters ranging from harassment to outright violence. Dick Van Dyke reportedly referred to Flynn as poison in a tux during a private conversation, noted an entertainment historian. It was particularly apt. Flynn's charming exterior made him more, not less dangerous. His public persona provided the perfect cover for behavior that would have shocked his adoring fans. Beyond his treatment of women, Flynn reportedly harbored Nazi sympathies despite playing soldiers fighting against Nazi Germany in films like Desperate Journey. The FBI investigated him for potential ties to fascist organizations, and his private correspondence revealed views on race and politics that contradicted the freedom-fighting heroes he portrayed. What made Flynn particularly disturbing to peers like Van Dyke was how thoroughly his public and private personas contradicted each other, observed the cultural analyst. Flynn essentially weaponized his charm and heroic image to enable predatory conduct that many in Hollywood were aware of, but few challenged given his box office power. Flynn's self-destructive tendencies, including legendary alcohol and drug consumption, eventually caught up with him. By his death at just 50 in 1959, the dashing hero of the silver screen had been largely replaced by a dissipated shell, but the damage he inflicted on others remained his most disturbing legacy. Hollywood ignored the rumors until it was too late, said the historian. The studio system didn't create Flynn's predatory nature, it simply protected and enabled it as long as he remained commercially viable.
With me on the radio, and I never heard him sing so beautifully. He had a quality, and his range seemed to have improved.
3. Bing Crosby, the cruel crooner. For millions of Americans, Bing Crosby's voice was the sound of Christmas, his gentle rendition of White Christmas, evoking warm family gatherings and nostalgic holiday cheer. His on-screen persona, relaxed, avuncular, wise, made him seem like the ideal father figure, a man whose apparent kindness and easy charm embodied American domestic ideals. This carefully cultivated image stands in stark contrast to the private reality revealed by Crosby's own sons after his death, a father whose parenting involved physical abuse, emotional cruelty, and a cold perfectionism that left lasting scars on his children. Van Dyke was reportedly horrified when he learned about the real Crosby family dynamics, said an entertainment historian. Like millions of Americans, he had bought into the image of Crosby as the quintessential good-natured dad. The reality, a father who regularly beat his sons with leather straps and metal-studded belts while maintaining rigid, impossible standards, shocked him deeply. In their memoir Going My Own Way, Gary Crosby, Bing's eldest son, and his brothers described a childhood dominated by fear and a desperate need to please a father who seemed incapable of showing genuine affection. Gary detailed how Bing had installed a trophy room in their home where he would take his sons to beat them for perceived transgressions, then expect them to emerge composed and without tears. The disconnect between Crosby's public warmth and private coldness particularly disturbed Van Dyke, noted the cultural analyst. Here was a man whose voice conveyed such apparent tenderness, singing "I'll Be Home for Christmas," while creating a home environment his own children described as emotionally barren and physically threatening. The hypocrisy was staggering. This hypocrisy extended to Crosby's professional reputation as an easygoing, low-maintenance performer. While he cultivated an image of casual perfection, those who worked with him described a man who maintained exacting standards and could be merciless toward colleagues who failed to meet his expectations. though his control was typically exercised through icy dismissal rather than Lewis-style explosive rage. Crosby's evil wasn't flamboyant, explained the historian. It was cold, calculated, and hidden behind perfect public manners. He was someone who could charm millions on screen and radio while subjecting his own children to abuse that left them with lifelong psychological damage. For someone like Van Dyke, who genuinely valued family and treated his own children with consistent warmth, this may have been the most disturbing betrayal of all. The contrast between Crosby's public persona and private reality became impossible to ignore after Gary Crosby published his memoir in 1983, 7 years after Bing's death. Though some family members disputed certain details, the overall picture of Bing as a harsh, physically abusive father was corroborated by multiple sources, including other Crosby children. He sang White Christmas while beating his kids, concluded the analyst. Evil can sound beautiful. That's what made Crosby's case so disturbing. His voice represented American warmth and decency, while his actions at home represented its complete opposite. Van Dyke, who managed to achieve similar success without sacrificing his humanity, found this particular duplicity almost impossible to comprehend.
Ribs and sauerkraut, and he never knew what hit him.
4. Wallace Beery, the brutal, gentle giant. In the 1930s and early 1940s, Wallace Beery's gruff but tender screen persona made him one of MGM's most reliable box office draws, specializing in playing rough-edged men with hearts of gold, most famously in The Champ and Min and Bill, both of which earned him Academy Award recognition. Beery created an on-screen image of a lovable brute whose gruffness masked fundamental decency. Behind the scenes, however, Beery was reportedly one of Hollywood's most genuinely feared figures, a man whose explosive temper, racist attitudes, and physical brutality made him dangerous to those unfortunate enough to work with him. Van Dyke allegedly described Beery as someone who didn't need to act to play a thug, noted an entertainment historian. It was a cutting observation about a man whose on-screen persona as a tough guy with hidden goodness inverted his real personality. A man who presented a professional facade that concealed genuine cruelty and violence. The most disturbing allegations about Beery center around a persistent Hollywood rumor that he was responsible for the death of comedian Ted Healy, creator of the Three Stooges. According to various accounts, Beery was part of a group that severely beat Healy outside the Trocadero nightclub in 1937, inflicting injuries that contributed to Healy's death days later. While never proven conclusively, numerous Hollywood insiders have maintained that MGM's fixers worked to cover up Beery's involvement in what would otherwise have been a career-ending scandal. The Healy incident, whether exactly as rumored or not, reflects what many who worked with Beery reported, that his violence wasn't just verbal or professional, but physical and dangerous, explained the film historian. Multiple accounts describe him hitting crew members, physically intimidating co-stars, and using his imposing size, he was around 250 pounds and over 6 feet tall, to threaten anyone who crossed him. This physical intimidation was reportedly accompanied by virulent racism that went beyond even the casual prejudice common in his era. Beery was known to refuse to work with black performers and crew members and would use racial epithets openly on set, creating a hostile environment that studios typically accommodated rather than addressed. What made Beery particularly unsettling to contemporaries like Van Dyke was the calculation behind his behavior, noted the cultural analyst. His cruelty wasn't just temperamental outbursts, but seemed to reflect a considered worldview. He wasn't just occasionally difficult, he was consistently abusive in ways that suggested he simply viewed certain categories of people as beneath basic human consideration. Unlike some difficult performers who at least delivered artistic brilliance that partly explained their behavior, Beery was considered a limited actor with good instincts rather than exceptional talent. His continued employment and high salary at MGM reflected not extraordinary gifts, but rather his reliable appeal to audiences and studio head Louis B. Mayer's personal appreciation for Beery's macho persona. He played lovable brutes, but the real brute was behind the eyes, said the historian. What disturbed Van Dyke and others about Beery was that his on-screen redemption stories had no real-life parallel. The gruff exterior didn't hide a heart of gold. It barely concealed a capacity for shocking cruelty that occasionally crossed into outright violence. That this man specialized in roles that emphasized the humanity beneath the rough surface represents one of Hollywood's most cynical disconnects between image and reality.
tough. What do you do in Los Angeles, Mr. McCree?
5. Spencer Tracy. Brilliant actor, brutal drunk. Few actors in Hollywood history have been more universally respected for their craft than Spencer Tracy. His naturalistic acting style, so authentic that he famously advised young actors that the secret was simply to know your lines and don't bump into the furniture, earned him 9 Academy Award nominations and 2 consecutive wins. On screen, Tracy often embodied moral authority, decency, and thoughtful masculinity. Off-screen, however, Tracy's legendary alcoholism revealed a man capable of shocking violence, particularly toward women, a dark side that his long-term partner, Katharine Hepburn, and the studio system worked diligently to keep hidden from the public. Van Dyke reportedly saw Tracy's destructive side firsthand at industry events, said an entertainment historian. While Tracy could be charming, intelligent, and enormously engaging when sober, his personality underwent a frightening transformation when drinking. The moral authority figure of judgment at Nuremberg could become physically threatening and verbally vicious after a few drinks. Tracy's alcohol-fueled violence reportedly targeted various people in his orbit, but posed particular danger to women. Multiple accounts describe him slapping, shoving, or grabbing women, including Hepburn, during alcoholic episodes, behavior that was typically excused as the unfortunate side effect of his disease, rather than addressed as the abuse it represented. What troubled Van Dyke and others about Tracy's case was how thoroughly his genuine artistic brilliance was used to excuse or minimize his frightening behavior, noted the cultural analyst. There was a collective agreement among Hollywood insiders that Tracy's contributions to cinema were so valuable that the women he harmed were essentially acceptable collateral damage. This moral calculation deeply disturbed those, like Van Dyke, who believed basic human decency shouldn't be sacrificed even for extraordinary talent. The contrast between Tracy's on-screen persona and his private behavior was particularly stark in films where he portrayed characters standing against violence or injustice. In classics like Bad Day at Black Rock or Inherit the Wind, Tracy embodied moral courage and principled resistance to brutality, values that his drunken behavior regularly contradicted in his personal life. Tracy's case is complicated by the fact that he clearly struggled with genuine alcoholism at a time when the disease was poorly understood, explained the historian. But what made his situation particularly troubling to contemporaries like Van Dyke was not just that he had a drinking problem, but that the entire Hollywood power structure conspired to shield him from any consequences for the violence that accompanied it. This protection extended to Tracy's complex personal life as well. Despite remaining legally married to his wife Louise for 43 years, his long-term relationship with Hepburn was an open secret in Hollywood while being carefully hidden from the public. This arrangement, essentially a studio-sanctioned fiction designed to maintain Tracy's image, reflected the larger pattern of image management that characterized his career. He could charm a camera and then slap it across the room, concluded the analyst. Tracy's brilliant acting often explored the complexities of flawed men trying to do right, which makes the protection of his own flaws particularly ironic. Van Dyke, who managed to create an equally significant career without leaving a trail of harmed women in his wake, reportedly found the industry's protection of Tracy symptomatic of a system that valued art over basic humanity, a moral compromise he refused to make in his own life.
Here. Always remember, go for the red first, because if you don't, your opponent will.
6. Kirk Douglas, darkest star of Hollywood's golden age. For millions of moviegoers, Kirk Douglas epitomized masculine intensity and moral complexity on screen. Through performances in classics like Spartacus, Paths of Glory, and Champion, Douglas created a distinctive screen persona, physically dynamic, intellectually engaged, and morally nuanced. His support for blacklisted screenwriters and willingness to tackle controversial subjects earned him a reputation for courage that extended beyond his fictional roles. Behind this admirable public image, however, Douglas allegedly left a trail of pain and fear, particularly among young actresses who described him as a predator who used his power to sexually assault women with impunity. Van Dyke was reportedly unequivocal in private assessments of Douglas, said the entertainment historian. When asked about Douglas's reputation, Van Dyke allegedly responded, "You wouldn't want your daughter alone with him." It was a devastating indictment from someone known for measuring his words carefully, especially about fellow performers. The most persistent allegations about Douglas concern an incident involving a 16-year-old Natalie Wood in the 1950s. According to multiple Hollywood sources, Wood was sexually assaulted by a major star significantly older than herself during an audition at the Chateau Marmont Hotel. While the alleged perpetrator was never publicly named during Wood's lifetime, numerous industry insiders have since identified Douglas as the star in question. The Wood allegation is particularly disturbing because it fits within a larger pattern of behavior described by multiple women who worked with Douglas, noted the cultural analyst. These weren't isolated incidents, but rather reflected what many in Hollywood understood to be his standard approach to young actresses, using his power and physical intimidation to coerce sexual encounters, secure in the knowledge that the studio system would protect him from any consequences. This protection was indeed extensive. Douglas's star power and commercial value ensured that complaints about his behavior were typically addressed through payoffs, career opportunities for victims willing to stay silent, or outright intimidation for those who threatened to speak publicly. The effectiveness of this system is evidenced by the fact that most allegations about Douglas emerged only after his death at 103 in 2020. What reportedly disturbed Van Dyke most about Douglas wasn't just the behavior itself, which was unfortunately not unique in Hollywood, but the extraordinary disconnect between Douglas's public advocacy for moral causes and his private treatment of vulnerable women, explained the historian. Here was a man who took public stands against the blacklist and for artistic freedom while allegedly using his power in the most exploitative ways behind closed doors. This contradiction extended to Douglas's on-screen personas as well. In many of his most famous roles, he portrayed men fighting against corrupt power structures and standing up for the vulnerable against exploitation, themes that stood in stark contrast to his alleged treatment of young actresses with far less power than himself. His legacy is silver screen greatness and whispered fear, concluded the analyst. What makes Douglas's case particularly significant is how thoroughly his alleged behavior was protected not just during Hollywood's studio era, but well into the modern period. Van Dyke, who built a career on genuine decency both on and off camera, reportedly found this decades-long protection of predatory behavior emblematic of an industry too willing to separate artistic merit from basic human decency. These 6 men represent not just individual cases of bad behavior, but a systemic pattern where artistic talent and commercial value were repeatedly deemed more important than the human damage left in their wake. From Lewis's cruel perfectionism to Douglas's alleged predation, each case reveals how thoroughly Hollywood's image-making machinery could conceal disturbing realities from the public. What makes Van Dyke's perspective particularly valuable is that he demonstrated throughout his long career that success didn't require cruelty, noted the cultural historian. His consistent kindness and professionalism stand as a quiet rebuke to the idea that artistic brilliance somehow necessitates or excuses harmful behavior toward others. The contrast between these men's carefully constructed public images and their private conduct raises uncomfortable questions about the entertainment we consume. The charming crooner whose voice defines Christmas was allegedly beating his children between recording sessions. The swashbuckling hero fighting for justice was reportedly assaulting women between takes. The lovable curmudgeon making audiences laugh was terrorizing crew members when cameras stopped rolling. These disconnects aren't just celebrity gossip. They're profound moral failures that the industry systematically enabled, observed the analyst. What reportedly troubled Van Dyke most was not just the individual behavior, which was disturbing enough, but the collective decision to prioritize entertainment value over basic human dignity. The system didn't just fail to stop abuse, it actively facilitated it when the abuser was commercially valuable. Perhaps most disturbing is how long these patterns persisted. From Beery's alleged violence in the 1930s to Douglas's reported predation extending well into the modern era, Hollywood demonstrated a remarkable consistency in protecting its bankable male stars regardless of their behavior, a pattern that has only recently begun to change with movements like #MeToo. Van Dyke stands as a living counterexample to the notion that this kind of behavior was simply how things were in earlier eras, concluded the historian. His career proves that one could achieve extraordinary success while treating others with consistent respect and kindness. That this approach made him the exception rather than the rule in Hollywood speaks to a moral failure that extended far beyond any individual actor, revealing an industry built on image-making that too often valued illusion over fundamental humanity. If you found this exploration of Hollywood's dark side compelling, please subscribe for more looks behind the carefully constructed facades of entertainment history. Let us know in the comments which of these revelations you found most surprising, and share your thoughts on how we should approach the artistic legacies of deeply flawed creators. Until next time, remember that the most important performances often happen when the cameras stop rolling, revealing character that no amount of Hollywood magic can enhance or disguise.